Good morning. My name is Brian Dittmer. I'm the outreach chair here at First Free. And when I was thinking about a Bible verse for this morning, I was just drawn to James 1 where it says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." And so when I think about the two ministries here that are represented, they are really the doers that are doing God's work in different capacities. So my hope that this morning you're encouraged and that you're encouraged by the work being done, and if called, that you too will join in their work in some way. I'm going to discuss the format. So after each presentation, you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions. Those are going to be facilitated by Pastor Jay. We are streaming and recording the event this morning, so to be sure that your questions are heard, please use one of the microphones. We're going to have one up here at the front, and there's going to be a floating mic as well, so just raise your hand if you have a question. The other thing that I want to share is, unfortunately, Tierre Webster from Damascus Way is ill, and he's not able to join us this morning. So we'll just be hearing from New Life and Arrive Ministries. So I want to introduce New Life. Our first presenter, Jenna Holst, is from New Life Family Services. She is their church relations coordinator. Jenna is in her 4th year on staff at New Life and has worked both in the centers directly with clients and now represents a new life to local churches. We also have a huge treat today. Marcia and April are here, mother and daughter duo, to share their personal experience with all three of New Life's programs a few years ago. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Good morning. I'm super glad to be here. 2 years ago, this was supposed to happen in March of 2020, and it didn't. So I'm so glad we rescheduled and just get to be together today. I'm always just grateful for all of our in-person gatherings that we're able to have. As Bryant said, my name is Jenna Holst, and I work as the church relations coordinator at New Life. What I love about this job is I get to be at churches like this that have a really rich partnership and history together. And I think we've been partnering for over 30 years with First Free, which is amazing. And as a ministry, we're only 48 years old. So you've really just been with us through the ride of our ministry growing and changing. And I'm just, really grateful that churches like this help us keep our doors open for almost 50 years. So since 1973, New Life has been on a mission to honor the sanctity of life. And we just believe that every life from womb to tomb has intrinsic value because it's made in the image of God. And we do our work out of that belief by assisting our clients in making life-affirming decisions with the love and compassion of Jesus. What we believe is that each and every person should have the ability to receive emotional, physical, spiritual support as they face pregnancy-related situations. And our goal in our work is to walk with each person we serve and offer them love and support to make informed and educated decisions in their time of need. What I love personally about working at New Life is that no matter what someone chooses, we have a pathway for them. We have a pathway that we walk with them. And that's represented by our 3 programs that are shown up there. So, for example, if someone chooses to make an adoption plan for their child, we're a full-service licensed adoption agency called New Life Adoptions. This was kind of my first touch to New Life. My husband has this kind of wild birth story. He says he broke his mom after he was born. And so all of his siblings are adopted, all 4 of them, and 2 of them were adopted through New Life. And so that was my first touch with our work. So through New Life Adoptions, we work with birth parents to consider what adoption would look like for them. We help them choose a family that fits what they want and need, and we provide care and ongoing support long after they place for adoption. What we say in our adoption program is once an adoption client, always an adoption client. Currently, our adoption program services families through both domestic infant adoption, and we provide home studies for embryo adoption. So if someone is in the midst of making a pregnancy decision, or if they choose to parent, we have our 4, soon to be 5, First Care Pregnancy Center locations. So just 6 minutes south of here is our Richfield location, and then just 10 minutes away will be our new location in the Phillips neighborhood in South Minneapolis, which we're very excited about. These centers, they kind of act as our storefront locations where we provide all of our services, our free services, pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, STD testing and treatment. We do decision-making counseling, and then one of my favorite programs is we have this huge wraparound parenting program that provides parenting education and material support to families from pregnancy till age 5. And what we believe is that there's kind of a gap from pregnancy until a child goes to school, and we're just seeking to fill that gap with support and education. Through our parenting program, we give away over 70,000 diapers a year. So we just feel like we have diapers coming out of our ears. It's one of my favorite programs, such an honor to walk with families. And that's really where our discipleship is happening, because our families come twice a month. They meet with a parenting coach, and we're just able to develop really sweet relationship. So finally, if someone chooses abortion, which is not the choice we hope our clients make, but the reality is it is a choice that they do make, we have an amazing program called Conquers, which offers hope, healing, and support to those who are struggling with the pain of a past abortion. Conquers meets in support groups and through one-on-one mentoring, always with others who have also had abortion as part of their story. The statistic I learned when I started working at New Life is that 1 in 4 women will have an abortion by the age of 45. And what this means is that all of us have been touched by abortion in some way, whether we know it or not. Even if it's not our story, it's the story of someone we probably love. And if that's your story today, I just want to invite you to learn more about Conquerors. It's a really beautiful program that's just full of just gospel truth, and it has just brought freedom and hope to so many people. I want to update you today on the impact of your giving and partnership with New Life through some numbers. I'm kind of a numbers person. I like to see them. So though many of us, I think, will look at these past couple years as really difficult, we had a worldwide pandemic, tragedy and destruction in our city, political division. At New Life, we've really been trying to stand and remember that in 2021, 860 women took pregnancy tests in our centers, and they had support. They sat with a social worker. We introduced 418 women to their babies through an ultrasound. We cared for over 500 men and women through STD testing and treatment. We sat with parents through almost 2,000 parenting appointments, cheering them on as they tried to navigate raising children through these last couple years, which has been really hard. If you're a parent, you know that. And we saw 42 women find healing from a past abortion. And finally, through what's only possible through partnering with private donors, we had 1,633 meaningful spiritual conversations with our clients, and some of them chose to follow Jesus for the first time. So despite all of the adversity, life just continues to come forth. Babies are being born, and we just know that the need for support will always continue no matter what. One of the most exciting and scary endeavors we've had in the last couple years is our Phillips project. 8 years ago, we started praying about this project and where we should open our 5th pregnancy center, and God led us to the Phillips neighborhood in South Minneapolis. We felt led to Phillips because 44% of people that live in the Phillips neighborhood live under the poverty line. And the average age, this was super interesting to me, is 29, which means it's just a really young neighborhood. There's probably a lot of children that live there, and there are no life-affirming pregnancy services being offered nearby. So in 2019, we bought land, and this project became way bigger than we ever thought or even wanted. And this past year, we broke ground on a 12,600 square foot building that will house our largest first care center, as well as a full service medical clinic. So as you can kind of see, kind of the right 2/3 will be our center, our first care center, and then that third on the left will be our partnership with Community Care Clinics of Minnesota, which is full service medical clinic. Yes, so I think it's 2015 Chicago Avenue. So it's right at the intersection of Chicago and Franklin by the busiest bus stop in the state. And we're just excited. We're really excited, also humbly afraid of this endeavor because it's a big space. It's a way different neighborhood than we've been in, and we're just super honored to partner with ministries that have been there for years and years and years, churches that are really solid in the neighborhood. And we're excited to kind of provide a hub where our clients can come and experience lots of different services. So I will be back up here to share at the end of our time, but the real highlight of today is we have Marcia and April with us who are going to share their New Life stories, and this is really the best way to see what New Life does. So can we welcome them to the stage?
Hi, I'm April, and this is my story. So I grew up in a pretty normal, supportive Christian home with 2 younger brothers. I transferred to Mankato for my second year of college, and I struggled a little bit because I didn't know anybody. And I was dating a guy from the cities, and it was a toxic relationship. So at just 19, 3 months into my second attempt at a college career, I found myself pregnant. At that time in my life, I was really self-centered, as most 19-year-olds are. And my very first thought when I found out that I was pregnant was, this is a problem, and I need to fix it. I need to get rid of it. So I couldn't continue college cheerleading while I was pregnant. So I scheduled an abortion at Planned Parenthood the first week in December when I would be home, and I didn't tell anyone. The weekend after Thanksgiving, my mom called because a family friend of ours named Nick had gone missing, and it turns out that night they found him and he had died by suicide. They ended up scheduling his funeral the day before my abortion appointment, and it messed up my plans for my abortion, and I thought, maybe this is a sign that I shouldn't have it. So I called Planned Parenthood and canceled my abortion. Even though I canceled the appointment, I was still on the fence about it, but being at his funeral was hard, and I was devastated about losing a friend. But it showed me that, the impact that one life can have on so many people, and that's what changed my life what changed my decision about the abortion and ultimately saved my son's life. I was still scared to tell my parents, and we're both here today. And at the end of December, I finally told my mom about my pregnancy. She was very supportive, and she told my dad for me. The hardest part was my dad looking at me and telling me he was so disappointed in me, because I'm a daddy's girl. I'm the only girl. So my mom and I went to New Life to help me process my options. They helped me look at both adoption and parenting, the pros and cons of each. And at that time, I decided adoption was the best decision. I began to look at family profiles, and one thing that was really important to me when I was choosing a family was I wanted my child's name to have Charles or Charlie in it some way. I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, in honor of my friend Nick, because that was his middle name. It was just one of the things that was super important to me in choosing a family. Not only did Mike and Katrina, the family that I was looking at, agree to keep that name, but their last name was actually the same as Nick's last name. And so it felt right, and I was just excited to meet them. But before I met them, my mom and I decided to go away on a spring break trip that year. And when we got back, I got to see my baby via ultrasound for the first time and only time. And I told her I changed my mind and that I actually wanted to parent. My parents said that they would support me no matter what, and while I was confident in my decision, I also knew that I'd be disappointing Mike and Katrina, and that was hard. Once I decided to parent, my social worker helped me prepare for parenting and find resources. I didn't have any experience with babies at all, so I began working at a daycare to help prepare myself. It was very eye-opening. I was 8 months pregnant and was placed into a room full of 14 two-year-olds. But also it was helpful, and I ended up appreciating the experience. My third trimester, however, ended up being very, very, very difficult. I was extremely sick, and I had something called PUPS, which basically means your body's allergic to the placenta. Didn't know that could happen. And I had cholestasis at the same time. So I was covered from head to toe in blistering, itchy hives. I ended up having to quit my job because I was in such bad shape. There was a little redhead in the little toddler room that just hated me. She just screamed every time she saw me. I guess I looked horrible. My doctor ended up inducing me 3 weeks early due to my conditions, and I literally had a 3 hours notice that I needed to be induced. It was a very hectic time. I ended up calling my mom and said, we need to go to Target. I need a crib. I need diapers. I need a car seat. I don't have anything, because my baby shower was that weekend. On July 6, 2016, Oliver Charles was born. I was living with my parents, and while they certainly helped me, they also let me be his parent. I struggled both physically and mentally. I had no job, no childcare, and no school at 20 years old. I felt really isolated and alone, and I decided to take one class at Mankato and began commuting 2 days a week from Prior Lake to Mankato, which was a nice mental break, but still exhausting because I was up all night with a baby. One particularly difficult day, when I got home from class and was just completely exhausted, my mom said, "I think you should revisit the idea of adoption." And even though it was so hard for me to admit, I knew she was right. So I called New Life and asked if Mike and Katrina were still available and interested in adopting. They were, and I met them in September when Oliver was 2 months old. It was really awkward. I didn't know them at all, but there was also this strange chemistry with them. I knew I wanted them to be Oliver's parents, and we began the process and transition visits right after I signed my parental rights away. We had an entrustment ceremony on September 28th at our church. An entrustment ceremony is a symbolic ceremony in which the birth mother entrusts the adoptive parents with their child. There were so many amazing things about this ceremony. Nick's family came to the ceremony, which was really special. The same pastor that presided over Nick's funeral actually did the entrustment ceremony. And it was also when I became Oliver's Mutti instead of his mom. So Oliver calls me Mutti, which is mom in German, if you don't know. And Mike and Katrina were so gracious, and they allowed us to have time with Oliver at our house afterwards. And then we brought him to their home. That was the first night he slept 10 hours in a row. While we had initially agreed to pretty minimal contact, Mike and Katrina reached out regularly to me, and I saw him quite frequently. They sent me texts and pictures, and they even asked me to babysit on Halloween by myself, which was amazing. Katrina was a teacher, and during our Christmas visit, they disclosed to us that they were having difficulty finding childcare for her to return to school. And Katrina, as it turned out, my mom had just quit her job, and she ended up watching Oliver full-time for 6 months. So I got to come home from college each week to see him regularly. It was amazing to be able to watch milestones in his life, like the first time he crawled. His first steps were from his mom to me. We saw them on holidays, and they even let us take him for his birthday. We continued the tradition that my parents had for me when I was younger, which was going to the Mall of America, it was Camp Snoopy back then, but we would go there, and however old you were turning is how many rides you got to ride. So we forced him on the carousel for his first birthday, and he didn't like that, but it's tradition. They've been so amazing, and we're just like an extended family. Two really beautiful things that have come out of my story is Nick's parents, in the midst of their grief, told me that Oliver is the one good thing that came out of his death. And the other amazing thing is thinking back to how disappointed my dad was the moment he found out I was pregnant and seeing him now with Oliver. They truly have an amazing bond, and it is special to watch. A quick update on my life now. I graduated college in May of 2019 with honors, and Oliver and his parents came to support me. I became a police officer in May of 2020, and they came to my swearing-in ceremony. Oliver is way more interested in firefighters than police officers, but he still likes to bring treats to the station. I also got married in October of 2021, and Oliver, who's now 5.5, was our ring bearer, and his new little sister was one of our flower girls. I even did a first look with my dad and Oliver, and the ceremony was done in the same chapel with the same pastor as Oliver's entrustment ceremony at Nick's funeral. I know my life would have been so different if it weren't for open adoption, and I wouldn't change a thing. I'm so thankful for Mike and Katrina and my parents and Nick, his family, New Life, and of course, Oliver, who forever changed me. Thank you.
When April shared the news with me that she was pregnant, I didn't really know what to say. There were so many questions and fears and unknowns. My heart broke for April because she had been carrying this secret for a long time. I couldn't imagine how hard it was for her to tell me. That took such courage. I hugged her while she cried on my shoulder, and we sat together. I knew right then and there that every decision needed to be made by April, and that my role was to provide unconditional love and support for my daughter and my grandchild. My daily guide was Psalm 61:1. Hear my cry, O God, listen to my prayer. I watched April as she navigated completing her year at college while she was pregnant, a physically horrible pregnancy, and the major decision that lie ahead for her and her child. There are no words that adequately describe the courage and strength and the depth of love April demonstrated in her decision to make an adoption plan for Oliver when he was 12 weeks old. This is the most selfless, loving act I have ever witnessed. When we walked into New Life Family Services the first time, they were very welcoming and kind. And from there, April walked down the hallway to a confidential meeting with a staff person. Meanwhile, I was in the lobby alone, and so I looked at all of the programs, the brochures. I wanted to find out whatever I could about this place called New Life Family Services. Little did I know that I would be back in the office myself in the months to come. Let's rewind the clock. As newlyweds, Jeff and I struggled with years of infertility, followed by 2 miscarriages, and then the birth of our daughter, April. What a blessing. And then we got pregnant again. We were delighted and then devastated. At 23 weeks pregnant, we received the news that our unborn baby had a medical diagnosis of trisomy 18. In the year 1997, approximately 50% of babies born with trisomy 18 lived longer than 1 week, and less than 10% lived longer than 1 year. Because of the timing of the diagnosis and my physical health, we were told that we had 1 week to decide. The decision was either to deliver our baby by 24 weeks gestation with absolutely no chance of survival, or to go full term with a 96% chance of dying at birth and an even greater chance of dying before 3 months old. Abortion was not a word that was mentioned. It was our decision. I wish I could say that we prayed day and night and totally sought God's perspective. We did receive pastoral counsel. In fact, we went right to our pastor from the doctor's office. But our pastor didn't tell us what to do, nor should he have. He cried right alongside us, and he prayed over us, and he prayed with us. Jeff and I focused on our earthly human being selves and our vision of how our world might look with wheelchairs, doctor visits, medications, plus our 1-year-old April. We were overwhelmed. We made our decision. Cody's induction was on April 30th, 1997, at 24 weeks gestation. He took his final breath upon delivery. Fast forward to 2018 and a program I questioned if it was for me. I made an appointment and told the counselor of my uncertainty, and she said she couldn't know that for me, but she would walk beside me while I figured it out. You see, the name of this program at New Life Family Services is Conquers, Restoring Hope After Abortion. There's that word, abortion. The Conquers program recognizes that how you came to your decision to have an abortion is unique, and your path for healing will be unique as well. I ended the life of my child during pregnancy. Yes, this program was and is for me. I was 31 years old and 7 years into our marriage. No 2 stories are the same, yet I am like so many women. The statistic Jenna gave was 1 in 4 women by the age of 45. Many people ask me if my husband went through the program with me. The answer is no, not technically, but yes. For the 12 weeks of my individual mentoring, I had a lot of homework, scriptures, things to work through, write down, think about, and I spread all of my information out on our dining room table. And Jeff would walk by, and occasionally he would say, "What are you working on this week?" And we sat, and we cried, and we prayed, and we healed as a couple that we hadn't in 21 years. So technically, no, he wasn't part of the program, but yes. One thing I want to emphasize is that New Life Family Services does not offer abortion services, nor do they give out phone numbers or addresses to do so. Their Conquerors program offers healing to people who have abortion in their story. The program is offered in a group setting or through individual mentoring. Everything coming from New Life Family Services is life-affirming. Did they save me and give me a new life and healing? God is the great Redeemer, but New Life Family Services was a tool that he provided. How did we find out about New Life? Friends whose granddaughter had an unplanned pregnancy a year before our daughter did. She also made an adoption plan for her daughter. God is good. I share my story to give God glory. I share my story to heal. I share my story for others to know that you are not alone. I share to give hope for redemption and freedom. I share it because whether you are male or female, young or old, you have or you will, or maybe you are currently walking through storms or carrying guilt and shame or anger or any other feelings that are part of our human lives. God knows and God sees. And he is here for each one of us, right where we are. God saves and redeems, and he wants you to walk in his freedom. I would like to close with hope from the word of the Lord in 1 Timothy 1:15-17. Paul writes, Christ Jesus came into this world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. But for that very reason, I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his unlimited love and patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive eternal life. Now to the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen.
Normally, I just get to speak with one of you guys, so it's such a treat today to have you both and just see this full picture of how God moved and redeemed and healed. It's amazing. As we close our time, I just want to talk about a few ways that you can personally get involved with the work that God's doing at New Life, and then we'll open things up for questions. So first, you can invest your resources into the work of New Life. My husband and I have personally chosen to become monthly donors because it provides reliable funds that New Life can count on each month as we look at the number of clients we're able to serve. I grew up with a single mom, and we went every week to get food and other resources from a local shelter. And so we relied on people to give there so that we could go every week. And so I just feel super led myself to give. And I just invite you, even if it's small, to give as you feel God leading you. Second, you can just spread the word about our services. I love that, both of you found out about New Life through someone you knew. And this costs nothing to do, but it really makes all the difference. And it's truly the best and most effective way that our clients find out about us. Third, you can volunteer. I love that I get to share with you guys here today because you're so close to two of our centers. And I just want to share some specific needs we have at each of our centers. In Richfield, we're really looking for Spanish speakers, if that's any of you in here. We need Spanish-speaking parenting coaches to walk with the parents who participate in our parenting program. And we also need administrative volunteers there who just love organization. And our office manager says she could really use a handy person to come and help with a few projects we have. At Phillips, we're looking for pretty much every type of volunteer as we start to open. We're looking for movers on move-in day, which will be sometime in April. Volunteers in all of our regular spots. People who love putting together IKEA furniture. If that's you, come on over. People who love to hang pictures on the walls. We just need a lot of help, honestly, to make this happen. So if you're interested in volunteering, I'd love to chat at the table afterwards. And finally, you can pray with us. a little over a year ago, we started sending out real-time prayer texts when a client is in our office making a decision about their pregnancy. So you can simply follow the instructions on the screen and sign up to receive those texts. So thank you so much for having us. And yeah, we'd love to answer any questions you have. I'm available to answer, but Marcia and April are open to answering questions as well.
Yeah, these are powerful stories, and there are people all around us who have never heard this sort of thing. All they hear is the abortion side. Has New Life been able to get into schools, into communities, to let these stories be heard?
It's been hard for us to get into, I mean, just honestly, to get into schools and other places like that. I think a lot of people have assumptions about places like us. And yeah, most public schools are not open. The best way we've been able to connect is actually at churches, like through social workers or nurses or people that are working, in the marketplace, I guess we'd say. And just getting connected with them and getting them informed about our services. And they've really become our best advocates in schools. We really have pretty good relationship with Christian schools, which has been a huge blessing. And we get lots of people from Christian schools as well. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. But I'm always hoping God kind of plants little seeds when we're at churches with people that are working in clinics or working in schools. Mm-hmm. We've spoken at Woodbury High School. There's a few schools that have been open, but most are not. Mm-hmm.
In 1999, my husband and I were at Inner City Church, and part of my responsibility was cleaning the building and doing the garden in the front, and there were marijuana plants growing in there, so I'd pick those out, and that was at Chicago and Franklin.
Yeah.
And so I'm just so touched that you have a new facility there, and I'm curious how that came to be, and I'm just really excited about that new place.
Yeah,
so.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and that place you're talking about is just 2 blocks away, essentially, from where Spot's going to be. Yeah, well, honestly, prayer is how it came to be. So as I've been connecting with pastors in the area, one of them shared, he's lived in the Phillips neighborhood his entire life. And he said his parents used to go to PB Park, which is right where our location's going to be, every week and pray against abortion. Pray for someone like us to be able to come. So I believe with all of me that that's why we're there. And then, the reason we got our land, which is like unheard of, I feel like in Minneapolis, is a church was leaving that location. And they just had essentially felt like everyone's kind of commuting to this location. Nobody lives here. So they moved to a spot that was, just closer to their congregation, and they wanted to give their land to a Christian organization. And so they found out we were looking, we got connected, and they definitely gave us a deal on that land and just made it possible for us to be there. Yeah.
My wife will probably slap me on the shoulder when I get home. She said, I could explain this to you. But you used a couple terms early in your presentation about adoption, a domestic adoption, embryo adoption. I'm not familiar with the specifics of that. Could you go into a little more detail?
Yeah. Those are great questions because, those are insider language. So domestic adoption is a local adoption. So sometimes when we think of adoption, we think of international adoption, like going, somewhere around the world and adopting a child. Domestic adoptions are local. So like April and Oliver, these are a local domestic adoption, if that makes sense. And we do from 0 to 2. Those are the age ranges we do adoption that we're licensed to do. We recently started doing embryo adoption. I had no idea what that was when I started at New Life. So I'll give the short synopsis. So essentially, when people walk through infertility, they often choose in vitro, and they'll have embryos that are created in a lab, which is amazing. And oftentimes, it's just a really expensive process for people. And so they can kind of choose how many embryos they can make. And then they have to make a decision about if they'll use all of them. And if they don't use all of them, what will happen to those embryos. So people kind of have a few options. They can either choose to dispose of the embryos. They can choose to donate them for research. They can place them for adoption. And I had no idea this was a thing. But what we believe is that life begins at conception. And so we believe that those embryos, if they're in the right environment, become adults. And they're people, they're souls. And there's 100,000 frozen embryos around the United States. And so this type of adoption would actually, you'd adopt the embryo and then carry that embryo. So you'd carry a child that's not biologically yours, and adopt them and raise them. So it's pretty amazing. I was giving a tour in our office the other day, sharing about embryo adoption, and one of the young ladies I was with, the local college student, was like, "That was me. I was adopted as an embryo," and she's 19. So that was really amazing. Just kind of to have that connection. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure.
Our next speaker is Wendy Meyering. She is the Director of Church Mobilization at Arrive Ministries, a Christian nonprofit that provides direct services to refugees and immigrants, including initial refugee resettlement. She oversees volunteer programming in the Twin Cities and outstate Minnesota, which mobilizes the church to welcome and extend the love of Christ to our new neighbors. Let's give Wendy a warm welcome.
Does love have an open door? Welcome, stranger. Give us your tired and poor. All those in need. Come every weary soul. Find your beautiful
Great. Well, I'm excited to be here this morning as well. I'm Wendy Meyering, and I am the Director of Church Mobilization at Arrive. I've been a part of the Transform Minnesota Ministries for almost 7 years now, so I work in the same building as Jenna. This is actually the first time I've heard New Life present, so that's really cool. She works just downstairs, I work upstairs, and it's cool that we get to hear each other present this morning as we're doing a lot of these church meetings, I'm sure all around the metro, and this one is really special to be a part of because of our partnership with First Free, specifically with just the amazing, and significant partnership that you guys have offered to house refugee families in your houses across the street. Am I pointing the right way? Yes, this way. Amazing. It's one of our greatest challenges, and I'll share more about that. But Arrive Ministries is a Christian nonprofit, and we exist to see life transformation for refugees, immigrants, and the church by loving refugees and immigrants practically, socially, and spiritually. So we take a holistic approach, recognizing that as newly arriving families come, there are a lot of practical needs that are apparent on the front end of their arrival and their adjustment to life in the U.S. But we oftentimes, as task-oriented people, make assumptions about what those practical things are. And so without knowing them socially, we oftentimes will make assumptions that are wrong. So we recognize that growing in a friendship and entering in socially is really important as we love them. And then, of course, that helps better inform us of where they're at spiritually and opens up conversations that are meaningful and that can extend the love of Christ very, very practically. So our strategy is accomplished through 3 different avenues. We provide direct program services. Arrive Ministries began in 1988 as World Relief Minnesota. We changed our name probably about 10 years ago now. And since we began in 1988, we've resettled more than 11,000 refugees. So we're one of 5 refugee resettlement agencies in Minnesota, welcoming brand new refugees coming from all over the world to make Minnesota their new home. We provide them case management for their first 90 days after they arrive, and then we have a variety of other social service programs that we can provide to refugee and immigrants, including our immigration and legal services team, which works on helping families apply for green card, citizenship, or to apply for other eligible family members to join them in the United States. We also have an employment counselor and then some other support staff that work with these newly arriving families through a social service and direct program avenue. The second way that we fulfill our strategy is mobilizing the church. You might recognize a few people in this photo, actually, because this is your church and a team that formed a couple years ago to walk alongside a family that still lives across the street. This is one of the biggest aspects of our ministry is mobilizing the church. As a staff of about 25 people, we recognize that our reach is really limited, but we believe that God has called his church to be the key agent for transformation. And so we love to be able to partner with local churches like yours throughout the Twin Cities, as well as Wilmer, St. Cloud, and Rochester. We have sites in all of those locations as well. Currently, we have more than 700 active volunteers who are loving our new neighbors with the love of Christ. That's really significant, and it's grown a lot in just the last 6 months, which I'll share more about. But we recognize that as people are growing in relationship with our new neighbors, we are seeing mutual transformation. We definitely have so much to give to these families, but we have so much to receive too, as we get to see God's image in them, get to learn from them, see how He's uniquely made them, and just have the opportunity to learn from them. So that's really what we're looking for, is genuine transformation that leads to mutual transformation, genuine friendship that leads to mutual transformation. And then the third way is that we call our communities to respond biblically. So we offer events and trainings, much like the one that we're doing this morning, throughout churches. Just in the last 6 months, we've done about over 60 of these at churches as they've reached out with interest to learn more specifically about the Afghan crisis and ways that they can partner with Arrive Ministries. We just recognize that there's a lot of myths out there about who refugees and immigrants are, and so we want to bring the church back to a biblical focus of what God says about welcoming the stranger in our midst. So I just want to highlight a couple of verses. There are a lot in the Old Testament and New Testament that talk about welcoming the stranger and loving the foreigner in our midst. This is just one of them from Leviticus. We hear God's heart for the stranger in texts like these, where he says, you should treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you and love them like you love yourself. He just continues to call the Israelites back to remembering their time in Egypt and how that felt, and recognizing that it's not fun to feel like you don't belong. It's not what he's called us as the church to do when we welcome strangers in our midst. We want them to feel like they belong. We have an opportunity to love them with his love. In the New Testament, Matthew 25:35 says, I was a stranger and you welcome me. Jesus himself is depicting himself as a stranger and saying that this is how you inherit the kingdom, is when you welcome the stranger. And these texts and so many others compel us and prompt us in the work that we do at Arrive Ministries. We're an entire believing staff who sees these commands as the reason behind the work that we do. All right, so I want to just transition now to who are refugees and who are the populations that we're working with at Arrive Ministries. Maybe I'll just open it up. If anybody wants to shout out, who are refugees, or what is something you think of when you hear the word refugee? Okay, yep, fleeing from danger. Anybody else? All right, I'll give you the legal definition. You're right, absolutely right, fleeing from danger. A refugee is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, and political opinion. And I have a slide that lists all of those different areas. So in order to be considered a refugee, you have to have that element of persecution. And it has to fit into one of those 5 criteria. A refugee is someone who's oftentimes left their country of origin. Oftentimes that's crossing into a neighboring country, and it's there that they are able to register with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and say, I'm fleeing for my life, I'm being persecuted based on one of these 5 criteria. It's then that their case is vetted and looked into further, and then they're registered and listed as a refugee. Sometimes that can mean that they're provided a food stipend or a place to live if they fled to a camp, for instance, but it also gets them on that registry for potential resettlement as an avenue to be resettled. All right, next question. How many refugees are there in the world today? I've heard the spectrum, so don't be shy. Any guesses? 1 billion. All right, higher or lower? Lower, okay. There are 26.4 million refugees in the world today, which is still a very, very significant number if you think about it. It's the largest refugee crisis that we've seen even beyond World War II. And so again, these are people who have left their country of origin and have fled because they've been persecuted for those 5 reasons. So these are people who have registered and their name is listed with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. What happens once they have fled? So these people are oftentimes waiting in a camp or a city, waiting for the situation to improve. There are 3 solutions that are recognized by the UN, and they are repatriation, integration, and resettlement. So repatriation, or the ability to return to your country of origin, this is most preferred by the UN as well as families who have fled. I mean, nobody wants to have to flee their homeland and leave everything behind. Refugees aren't seeking a better life somewhere else or the American dream. They are literally forced out of their homes. And so repatriation would be the ability for them to return home. But if you think about the conflicts that exist in the world today, the situation hasn't improved enough in their homeland for them to be able to return home and not receive that persecution. So even with some of the largest populations that we have here in Minnesota, Somalis, Karen, the situation hasn't improved enough in Somalia or Burma for them to return home and not face that element of persecution. So unfortunately, repatriation isn't a option that is oftentimes available to people. The second option is integration, or the ability to integrate into the country that they've fled to. But again, if you think about the conflicts that exist around the world, and if people are leaving their country of origin into a neighboring country, those are oftentimes developing nations that just don't have the infrastructure to accommodate 500,000 people. I was in Kenya just over, it's been 2.5 years now, at Kakuma refugee camp, which is one of the largest refugee camps in the world. It's in the far northwest portion of Kenya, one of the most desolate, sun-hit parts of the country where people just don't inhabit. And they have a very, very large refugee camp there that's existed for 30 years. There are 250,000 people that live there and another 250,000 people that live in Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya. Realistically, Kenya doesn't have the infrastructure to take 500,000 people in, provide them jobs, housing, healthcare, all those things. They're a developing nation themselves, and they, like many other countries around the world, don't allow integration to be an option either. So the third option, resettlement, or the ability to resettle to another country, these are the people that we get to work with at Arrive Ministries, those select few who are selected for refugee resettlement to a third country where they can rebuild their lives. All right, so next question then is, somebody is selected for resettlement. What is the average time they wait before being resettled in a camp or city, like Kakuma refugee camp? What is the average time a refugee waits? 5 years, okay, who else? 10? 1 year? The average time a refugee waits is 17 years. Right? It's shocking. It's a shocking number, and take into account this is the average, okay? So the first family I ever case managed was a Karen family of 4, mom, dad, and then they had 2 sons. The mom of the family shared her story with me after they arrived. She said her mom had shared their story of fleeing with her when she was growing up and said, I carried you on my back as a 1-year-old little girl as we fled through the jungle of Burma to cross the border into Thailand. So she was 1 year old when she arrived in Thailand. She grew up there. She lived there for 25 years and then was resettled as a 25-year-old woman. So she got married in the camp and had her first 2 sons in the camp before she was ever resettled here. So for her, it was a 25-year wait, essentially. We have another family of Burma that is scheduled to arrive in March. Before we receive families, we get very limited paperwork on their details, but one of the things that it will sometimes include is their date fled. This one really struck my attention because it's a family with 3 generations in it, and it says that their date fled is 1976. So 17 years, again, is the average. Sometimes we'll have people that come after just a couple years waiting, 5 years waiting, but on average 17 years, which is a hard thing to grasp, isn't it? What percentage of refugees would you suppose are ever resettled of that 26.4 million people that I named? What percentage do you think are resettled to countries like the US, Canada, Australia, the UK? 10%, okay. Others? 35%. All right, 5. Yeah, less than 1% are ever selected for resettlement. Now, I should mention that there's 26.4 million refugees in the world today. Not all of them are eligible for resettlement at this time, given that there's extensive vetting, background checks, medical clearances that each family must undergo before they're ever resettled. And so, while not all 26.4 million are eligible at this time, less than 1% are selected for resettlement, which is why that 17-year wait limit is such a long period of time, as they're waiting and going through all of that processing. You may be aware that the last 4 years we've seen a significant decrease in the number of refugees that we've received in the United States. And so this number has really hit me and stayed on my mind the last 4 years as we've welcomed fewer and fewer families. So every time we get to go to the airport, it's just a reminder that these are miracle families that we get to welcome here in our communities. These are people that survived the persecution in their homeland. They survived the journey to a neighboring country and the conflict that they likely experienced on the way. They survived the horrible conditions in a refugee camp. And then they were one of the few that were selected to be resettled to a third country like the United States. We get the joy of going to the airport, oftentimes with their family or friends, to welcome them. And every time it's just a reminder that we get to do some amazing work as Arrive Ministry staff, but also in partnership with the church to welcome these families. Oftentimes it might be the only time that they've ever been welcomed somewhere. We're glad you're here. We're here to help you rebuild your life, and we're excited to learn from you and see the unique ways God has made you. All right, so I want to share a little bit about how refugees get resettled across the United States. This might get a little bit into the details, but I think it's significant, especially given the last 6 months and what we've been experiencing at Arrive Ministries. So let me break down this chart for you. Don't be overwhelmed. This slide just gives an overview of the number of refugees allowed into the United States in a given year, or called the refugee ceiling, which is represented by the green line that you see there, so the top line. Since the refugee resettlement program began in 1980, so just over 40 years ago, the average refugee ceiling in that time has been around 80,000 people admitted to the United States in a given year. Over the past 4 years, you can see that the ceiling has significantly decreased to some of the lowest numbers we have ever seen. So that green line has progressively gone down the last 4 years. And then the blue bar that you see represented is the actual number of refugees admitted into a given year. So as I mentioned, we've been in a decline the last 4 years, fewer and fewer refugees arriving in the United States. How that breaks down locally, you can see on the next slide. At Arrive Ministries, this is what our numbers have looked like the last few years. As you can see, the past several years, we've seen some big changes. So historically, we've resettled around 400 refugees through our office alone in a given year. But the past 4 years, we've followed that national trend with some of the lowest numbers we've ever seen, with the lowest ever of only being 50 people that we resettled last year. This is due to the political changes that have taken place. And so with the change in administration, our arrivals for this next year have increased to be 325 people. So what this means is that we're in a season of rebuilding the infrastructure that we've lost over the last 4 years. And we've hired 11 new staff in order to welcome and serve these families well. So 11 new staff have joined us since May. So it's been a very, very busy season of rebuilding, of learning again, of creating processes so that we're able to welcome these families well. This was all happening before the Afghan crisis started in August. So you're probably well aware the Afghan crisis occurred at the end of August with the U.S. pulling our military out of Afghanistan. And so now what we've seen is many, many Afghan evacuees that have joined our community, including one of the families that lives across the street now. So more than 60,000 individuals were evacuated from Afghanistan beginning in the end of August. These individuals have been given temporary status of humanitarian parolee due to their emergency evacuation from Afghanistan. While they're not technically refugees, these individuals are fleeing due to that same fear of persecution and are being resettled across the United States through the refugee resettlement program and agencies like Arrive Ministries. So I'll show you one more bar chart here. What that's done is that's increased our rebuilding and the significance of that change that much more. So we have welcomed 127 Afghans since October. That's a lot after going from 50 total people all of last year and then welcoming 127 Afghans on top of the refugees that we've received. So we've seen 246 people that we've received since September of this year. In this 6-month period, 256 people have arrived. We've found 45 homes for families. It's been a whirlwind, quite honestly. It's been the busiest season that for sure we have ever had since I've been at Arrive. And we could not have done this without the partnership of the church. And I mean that wholeheartedly. We could not have done this without church partners stepping up and being there and saying, we'll do this with you. So more than 60 Good Neighbor teams, First Free is one of them, have partnered with us this fall and winter to welcome these Afghan families as well as other refugee families in our communities. We just ask for your continual prayer as they continue to come, and we're welcoming them at the airport and serving them. Pray for our staff that we would just continue to persevere. Pray for rest when we get it, and just the joy that comes from welcoming these families. All right, so what services do these families receive when they arrive, and what do we do with them at Arrive Ministries? Each year, Arrive signs a contract with the U.S. government to provide required services to our refugee clients. So the case management period lasts a maximum of 90 days, and the goal of the program is self-sufficiency. I'll say that again. We get 90 days with these families. Some of them have spent 20 years in a camp overseas, and after 90 days, the goal is self-sufficiency for them to live here in the U.S. Maybe a little unrealistic for the government, and so as you can imagine, it's not a lot of time. which is why we love partnering with volunteers who don't have a deadline. We have a deadline. We must close their case by day 90. The church does not have a deadline. And so we love partnering with churches who will commit to continue walking alongside them, helping them get oriented on their life here in the United States, and just troubleshooting some of those problems that continue to come up. So many things that we just never think of, that we learn just with time that just takes longer. I'll share a quick story. We resettled an Afghan family several years ago, and the father of the family spoke some English because he'd been an interpreter with the U.S. military, as most of these Afghan families are. They've served with the U.S. military in some capacity. He had called me because he was trying to set up auto pay from for his travel loan. I didn't share this, but each family that comes has to repay their airfare from the plane ride from getting from, say, Syria or Burma to the United States. They must start repaying that 4 months after arrival. So he was looking to set up auto pay so that he could pay his travel loan, and he couldn't figure it out, which was confusing to me because he spoke some English. So I said, sure, I'll come over to your house and I'll try and help you figure it out. What he was getting hung up on is they were asking him to select security questions and answers so that he could create an account. Well, you know what I'm talking about. We have to select these security questions. What are the security questions that you have to answer? They're like, what's your favorite concert you've ever been to? Or what was the name of your 6th grade English teacher? Or what was your high school mascot? Like, all of these were completely irrelevant to him and his life. And so we had to select questions and then write down fake answers so that if he was ever prompted again in the future, he could answer them. Who would ever think to cover that in the first 90 days? And so that's why we love to be able to connect people who will befriend these families and continue to walk with them as time goes on. Each person that comes receives a one-time grant of about $1,000 per person. Almost all of that grant goes to paying for housing, which again, I would just say is one of our greatest challenges, which is why we love that you guys have partnered with us to welcome and house these families when they first come. Finding safe, sanitary, and affordable housing on a bus line can feel impossible at times. And so, yeah, it's just been an amazing struggle. I mentioned 45 homes that we found in the last 6 months. That's a lot of homes to find that check each of those criteria boxes. I was sharing with Pastor Jay that another church in the North Metro, Grace Evangelical Free Church, recently purchased a home right behind their church with the sole purpose of renting to a refugee family. So actually, it's this family in the photo, coincidentally. And so this is a Sudanese family that arrived in September, family of 7. They're now renting from the church's property. And it's just amazing to see just that catch on, that vision of we want to provide welcome in this very tangible, proximate way. What's really cool is this family is Arabic-speaking Muslim family living on the church's property. And a Sudanese congregation just began meeting in that church's building, also Arabic-speaking. And so while this family's Muslim, they are attending those services because it's providing them really proximate community where they can share that language. How amazing is God just with orchestrating all of that? I learned that the day that we asked if they would house this family, the paint was still drying on the walls when we moved them in. Like, it was such a quick turnaround because that's how housing always goes for us, it seems. It's very last minute, and we just are thankful that God keeps providing. And he really does. And so I would just continue to ask, if you have housing connections, send them our way. Because we will always take those referrals. We're continually looking for families that are arriving. I think we have 3 arrivals this week alone. We couldn't do it without the church. I sincerely mean we could not do this work without you, and so thank you very much for your partnership. One of the ways that you've been partnering with us is by forming a Good Neighbor team. That was the photo that I showed a few slides back. As I mentioned, more than 60 teams have partnered with us since September to welcome our newly arriving families. In this season of drastic rebuilding, this is just so essential for us to be able to do this. Historically, 95% of refugees we resettle are joining family or friends here in Minnesota. So when we welcome a Karen family from Burma, they oftentimes will have family or friend already here who we can go to the airport with to provide that welcome for them. What's unique about this season is of those 247 people that we've welcomed in September, 70% of them have no U.S. tie. So there is no family or friend that's here. Literally, our staff and the Good Neighbor team that meets them at the airport are the only people they know here. So what that means is the church is stepping in to be that initial community in a very, very significant way. Being that one of the greatest poverties that refugees face is loneliness, this is a huge opportunity for the church to be the church. Step in, provide friendship, provide welcome, be a contact in somebody's phone who they can call when they need something, but also just be very aware of the situation and available for prayer. And that's the on-ramp to see that mutual transformation, which is our purpose and what we're striving for as genuine friendship is growing. So we are just so thankful for your partnership the last few years. So far, you've welcomed 3 families, and that's just been amazing. And I think that there's other members of this church who are involved in our other church mobilization programs, including SALT, which is Somali Adult Literacy Training. We have a homework help program, a sewing program, and those programs are happening here in the Twin Cities as well as those other locations throughout the state that I mentioned. And so we're just humbled by how God is using Arrive, but especially how He's using the partnerships with churches like yours to advance His community as we welcome the stranger. So thank you, sincere thanks. The best way for you to find out how you can get involved, which is there's constantly opportunities, is just to go on our website. We have a registry online if you're interested in giving household items. We fully furnish all of the homes that we provide for these families, and so if you want to give household items or donate to that cause, you absolutely can. We are continually asking for volunteer support, and we just launched a new move-in team for all these moves that we're doing, and so you can go to our website, arriveministries.org/get-involved to find out all those details of how to get involved. So thank you so much. I can answer any questions that people have. I know I talk kind of fast and I include a lot of info, so if any clarity is needed, please ask.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, if you have any questions, step up to this mic. Otherwise, raise your hand. I am happy to bring my mic to you.
Thanks. I have a question about the difference between that status that the current Afghan refugees parolees, yeah. Can you describe that a little more on the time frame and how that works?
Yeah, so because of their very quick evacuation from Afghanistan, there wasn't enough time to process these individuals as refugees. Like I said, the average wait time is 17 years. So what they've been given is a temporary status called parolee or humanitarian parolee. This gives them the ability to stay in the country for the next 2 years. They have 2 years to find a permanent status here. So many of the Afghans that are coming were on track to be getting what's called a special immigration visa, which is specifically given to people who have aided the U.S. military. Many of them were in process, but they were pulled out before that could be completed, and so they're working with local attorneys now to complete that process. Part of our 90 days with these Afghans is to connect them with legal services so that they can find an avenue to stay here permanently. Special immigrant visa will be probably the status for most of them. Others will maybe seek asylum here in order to stay here. It's possible as well that since there's more than 60,000 Afghans here, the government will create a different avenue for them to be able to stay here legally. It's just that it wasn't created in the overnight way that they were evacuated.
I have 2 questions. One's probably a quickie. You referred to Burma, which a country is also known as Myanmar.
Correct.
And I guess I wonder why you did that. It could be a political reason, I don't know. For example, in the current Russian-Ukrainian crisis, the capital of Ukraine is called by Ukrainians Kyiv, apparently, whereas the Russians refer to it as Kiev. Mm-hmm. And so we're choosing in our newscasts to call it Kyiv.
Right.
So you could answer that one, but you want to do that quickly?
Sure. That's exactly the reason why we refer to Burma. All of our Karen families that have arrived still refer to it as Burma. The changing the name to Myanmar was a political move by the Burmese, who were their persecutors, and so we continue to call the country Burma.
That's what I suspected, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, yep.
Then the other question I have, and you spent some time in a refugee camp in Kenya, you mentioned.
Yes.
It had 250,000 people, I think you mentioned.
Yes.
And I would guess around the world with all the refugee camps, the experiences would vary somewhat. But what crosses my mind, I guess that's why we're here, I don't normally think about it, what happens in those refugees camps if people are there for a decade or more? Is there employment? Who provides the food? The United Nations? What is life like in a refugee camp?
Yep, that's a great question. So it can vary camp to camp, country to country, because the individual nations are the one implementing the services. I can speak to what I saw in Kakuma, which was refugees who arrive in Kakuma are sent to like a central processing center in the middle of the camp. There is where they register with the United Nations as a refugee. They're given a plot of land, and then they're also given a metal roof and instructed to build their own house, essentially. So they make bricks from dirt mixed with water that bake in the sun. Once those bricks are enough to form their home, they'll add that metal roof, and then that's where they inhabit their land. I met people who had lived there for 30 years, since the day that it opened. Anybody who I met who looked like they were under 18, when I asked them which country they were from, they would answer Kakuma. So they've lived there their whole lives. There's next to no employment opportunity, although there's like pop-up shops. You can buy Coke, and you can buy luggage, and you can buy whatever you might need in the camp that's just brought in through oftentimes Nairobi. And so there's little pop-up shops throughout the camp. And then a few people are employed through like the NGOs that operate there as well. But you can't go into Nairobi and get a job or anything like that. And schools are very limited. And so people live off of a small stipend where they get rations on probably a daily or weekly basis, depending on what has come in that week. And then they just live off of whatever their relatives will oftentimes send them from their home country or from here. So it's a very, very minimal, limited life there with little education or employment opportunity. So that's Kakuma. Other parts of the world, refugee camps look a little bit different. The longer established ones oftentimes have more resources available, but it's still very minimal. Yeah.
So following up, to go from that to be expected to be self-sufficient here in 90 days without education or much previous employment is fairly ridiculous.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's actually what my question was, is so this idea of 90 days, I have stuff sitting on the side of my bed for longer than 90 days that I should put away. But, so just practically speaking, I understand the government has this 90-day requirement, but what happens after that?
Yeah, no, that's great.
And what opportunities do we have a church to be part of that?
Yeah. So we, as Arrive Ministries, have 90 days, but we also get to connect them with as many services in our community as possible. So each family is connected with an employment counselor who will work with them to ensure that they find them a job. We connect them with like county assistance programs. We get them a social security card so they're able to work. We get kids enrolled in schools, parents with ESL classes. So we're connecting them with all these avenues which will help them better their lives here in a longer term capacity. But yeah, 90 days isn't a lot of time. And we don't have the time even to connect them to all the resources that would be helpful for them. And so that's a big part of what the church does. Actually, David McCoy, who attends this church, was the first one to tell me about energy assistance program available for $9 a month that he got for the families across the street. We now enroll all of our families into this program because it's really, really helpful. So just things like that where we might not have enough time to connect them to all those services. There are lots of services in our community that will help families progressively become self-sufficient over time. And so just researching and connecting and helping in that capacity. But this church has a good neighbor team that's walking alongside the Afghan family that lives across the street, and then the family from Guinea next door to them. Perhaps there's an opportunity for you to get plugged into that team to just continue providing for those families, or we're always open a second team to form for another family. We continue to receive families that are arriving. So I would just say researching, figuring out avenues that could be more incremental as families gain self-sufficiency and capacity to live here.
Sorry, let me just say real quick, Janet. So the team that I was on helped with Fatumata across the street, and shortly after she moved in, we had helped her. She had some interviews scheduled. She eventually gets a job with a hotel downtown. It's perfect. She can grab the bus right outside the house, take it down to the job. And that was, February 2020. And then almost immediately, COVID happens. The job is gone. And we were like, oh man, this is going to be so brutal. Like, poor Fatumata, we're going to have to try and figure out. By the time we polled internally in our group and talked to her, she was like, oh, I've got some interviews scheduled. And she found the next job. So it is ridiculous, but these people are amazing. And so, the thing that was most impressive to me was actually how little help she needed. And we were able to be supportive and cheerleaders, but man, they are amazingly capable. And so, I don't know, I would say that's maybe the biggest thing I learned is I was before we could even figure out what to tell her about this terrible thing that's happened, she had already moved on. So it's cool.
It's a great point. Yes, absolutely. Problem-solving skills, survival skills alone, all these families come with after getting from their home country to finally make it here. So they're very resilient people. Figure it out. It's a great point.
If you know, how many people and the services that the U.S. has for the 90 days, how does that compare with other countries that might be taking refugees? Do they have limits like that too? And what percentage of refugees that are resettled around the world come to the U.S. compared to going someplace else?
Lots of questions I don't know the answers to. No, those are good questions. I know that Australia has a longer time frame. I think it's 8 months or something like that they work with their clients. That's what we've just heard secondhand. I don't know the percentage of breakdown currently. I just know that historically the U.S. has taken the most refugees worldwide.
Day 1, 2, and 3, where do they sleep?
Oh, yeah, so we would love to be able to move them into their home, night one. Oftentimes we will have host homes take them for the first couple nights if there isn't a place for them to stay. Like I said, historically 95% of refugees coming are joining family or friends, so they'll oftentimes stay with them until housing is secured. For the Afghans that have come since October, the state of Minnesota actually rented out a hotel, which allowed us some buffer time where they stayed while we found housing.
I'm curious, I could probably Google this, but maybe you have insider information. What's the latest with that? Is it Camp Ripley or in Wisconsin where a lot of Afghan people were located temporarily?
Yeah, sure. As far as I know, the forts are almost all empty. So Camp Fort McCoy, is that what it was? Fort McCoy in Wisconsin was the closest in proximity to Minnesota, but we've received Afghans from all over the country in the various forts. I think there's 9 of them where Afghans have stayed temporarily. As far as I know, those are almost all emptied. They are expecting to bring more Afghans over to the United States from where they've been staying in different countries. I think Qatar and Germany have been hosting some since August, and now we'll be taking more of them. So maybe those will go into the forts, but as far as I know, they're almost empty at this point.
There's sometimes been concern that there will be people among the refugees who are taking advantage of the opportunity with either criminal or terroristic concern. This came up a number of years ago when we had a mission conference, and someone, I don't remember the name, from the National Free Church quoted from Paul in Athens when he said, God has determined where people shall live and the time that they live there so that they might seek him.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, refugees are one of the most vetted form of immigration that exists with the United States. They go through extensive medical and security clearances. All of their stories are checked out before they're processed. Even still, no refugee, no one with refugee status who's come to the United States has ever taken an American's life. That status is still active, and so refugees are extremely vetted. But yeah, we definitely believe that God is bringing these people here. How amazing is it that we live here in Minneapolis, Phillips neighborhood, which was talked about, has more than 100 languages spoken. We don't have to go to Somalia or Afghanistan, some of the most unreached nations in the world, in order to share Christ's love. We have the opportunity here, literally across the street. That is just an amazing opportunity that we have, and we do believe that God is orchestrating that.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Thanks for answering those questions. Thank you for the good questions. Give her a round of applause. And yeah, I just want to follow up on that to close. Obviously, right now, if you want to be discouraged and upset about the state of the world, it's real easy to be discouraged and upset. Plenty of things to see and to fuel that. I have to admit, I'm right now feeling newly outraged that we charged the Afghan people that helped our military for their flights here. So I'm going to pray about that and pray that maybe we fix that. But beyond that, what I would encourage you is, I would say the reverse is true, which is one of my favorite sayings from seminary, one of my professors: God works the night shift. And what he means by that, what I mean by that, is that God is always at work, even when we don't see it, even in places where we are not. And what we need to do often is to open our eyes and pray and ask the Lord to open our eyes. This morning, I don't know about you, I had my eyes opened to some of the ways that God is at work right here in our neighborhood. Incredible things, incredible stories. Encouraging, life-giving testimonies and stories about what God is up to. And here's the best part. We get to be part of that if you want. People from our church are already part of that. I would encourage you, I'm already thinking about this. Share this video with people. It's on YouTube. It's easy to do. Share it with other people at church who weren't able to be here this morning. Share it with people that you know in your life. This is a tremendous opportunity in the midst of a lot of discouraging things happening in the world to be a part of something wonderful, redemptive, to be a part of the work God is doing to partner with him. He wants us to join in with him, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity to do that right here, literally across the street. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. And then let's bow and close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we do thank you. God, we give you praise for these amazing stories, just incredible testimonies about the ways that you are at work all over the world, the way that you're at work here in our own neighborhood. Lord, the way that you have been at work in and through our own congregation. Lord, we're just amazed. We're humbled by what you have chosen to do. And God, I just pray that we would leave here this morning excited by what you're up to, excited by the opportunity that we have to partner with you in that work. And God, I pray that you would move us, move our church, move people who are seeing and will see this video to become similarly involved, to know the joy that comes from participating in kingdom work. God, I want to lift up New Life. I want to lift up Arrive. We want to lift up Damascus Way as well. God, I thank you for the work that you're doing through those ministries. I pray that you would richly bless them. Lord, that you would continue to amaze them by the way that you provide for them. I thank you for just some of these new stretches, both for Arrive as they see a huge influx of people this year, and for New Life as they open this giant new facility. Father, reward them for stepping out in faith, for taking on these big tasks. Lord, I pray that you would be faithful to provide as you always are. In your name we pray, amen. Thank you for joining us. Have a nice afternoon.